The old train station at Millfield had been forgotten by time itself. Sarah Mitchell stood on the cracked platform, her breath forming small clouds in the bitter February air. Her wool coat, once a deep navy blue, had faded to the color of storm clouds. She pulled it tighter around her shoulders, but the wind seemed to find every gap, every loose thread. The station clock had stopped working years ago. Its hands pointed to 3:15, though Sarah knew it was well past 6 in the evening. The last train of the day should have arrived 20 minutes ago, but in a place like Millfield, should have meant very little. Sarah had been teaching at the elementary school in town for 3 years now. 3 years of watching children grow, of grading papers by lamplight, of finding joy in small victories. Today had been particularly rewarding. Little Emma Rodriguez had finally mastered long division, and Tommy Chen had read his first full chapter book aloud to the class. But now, standing alone on this forgotten platform, those warm moments felt very far away. The wind picked up, rattling the old wooden benches and sending a newspaper tumbling across the tracks. Sarah checked her phone again. No signal. There never was, out here at the edge of nowhere. The nearest house was 2 miles down a country road that seemed to disappear into darkness. She had moved to Millfield after finishing college, drawn by the promise of making a difference in a small community. The pay was modest, but the school had needed her, the children had needed her, and for the most part she had been happy. But evenings like this reminded her how isolated she had become. The train tracks stretched in both directions, disappearing into the twilight like silver ribbons. Sarah wondered if she should start walking. The next town over was only 8 miles. She could probably make it before full darkness fell if she hurried. She was about to step off the platform when she heard footsteps. They were quiet, measured, steps coming from the direction of the old station house. Sarah turned, expecting to see the station master, though she knew perfectly well that Millfield Station hadn't had an official station master in over a decade. Instead, she saw a tall figure emerging from the shadows. The man was dressed in a long dark coat that looked like it belonged to another era. His hair was silver-white, combed neatly back, and his face carried the kind of lines that spoke of many years and many stories. He moved with a quiet dignity, as if he were walking through a cathedral rather than across a run-down train platform. He nodded to Sarah, but said nothing. She watched as he settled onto one of the old benches, folding his hands carefully in his lap. His presence was somehow both mysterious and comforting. He seemed to belong here in this forgotten place, in a way that Sarah knew she never would. Minutes passed in silence. Sarah found herself stealing glances at the stranger. There was something about him that seemed familiar, though she was certain they had never met. Perhaps it was the way he sat so still, so patient, as if he had all the time in the world. The cold was getting worse. Sarah's teeth had started to chatter, and she could no longer feel her toes inside her boots. She wondered if the stranger was cold too, but he showed no signs of discomfort. He simply sat, looking down the tracks with a distant expression. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, Sarah spoke. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Do you know if the evening train is still running? I've been waiting quite a while." The man turned to look at her. His eyes were a pale blue, the color of winter sky. For a moment he seemed to be considering her question very carefully. Then he smiled. It was a gentle smile, full of kindness. Instead of answering, he stood up and walked over to a small building Sarah hadn't noticed before. It was tucked behind the main station house, almost hidden by overgrown bushes. He disappeared inside and emerged a moment later carrying a thick wool blanket. He approached Sarah and held out the blanket without a word. She hesitated. Her mother had always warned her about accepting things from strangers. But the cold was becoming unbearable, and there was something about this man that felt safe, trustworthy. "Thank you," she said, taking the blanket gratefully. It was the softest wool she had ever felt, and it was warm, not just warm from being indoors, but warm in a way that seemed to come from within the fabric itself. Sarah wrapped it around her shoulders and immediately felt better. The stranger returned to his bench. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thermos. Steam rose from it when he unscrewed the cap, and Sarah caught the scent of hot chocolate. Rich, real hot chocolate, not the powdered kind. He poured some into the thermos cap and offered it to her. Sarah accepted it with trembling hands. The first sip was perfect. It warmed her from the inside out, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. "This is wonderful," she said. "Thank you so much." The man nodded but still said nothing. They sat in comfortable silence as Sarah drank the hot chocolate. The stranger seemed content to wait, watching the tracks with the same patient expression. Sarah found his presence oddly soothing. For the first time in hours, she wasn't worried about the train or about getting home. That she finished the drink, she noticed something strange. The platform, which had been cracked and weathered when she arrived, now seemed different. The paint on the benches looked fresh. The old station house appeared to be in perfect repair. Even the clock, she realized with a start, was ticking steadily. She looked at her phone. Still no signal, but the time read 7:42. "I'm Sarah," she said, introducing herself to the stranger. "Sarah Mitchell. I teach at the elementary school in town." The man's eyes lit up when she said this. He reached into his other coat pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. He wrote something quickly and handed it to her. In elegant handwriting, it read, "I know. You're doing important work." Sarah stared at the note. "How do you know what I do?" The man wrote again. "Small towns have long memories. Good teachers are remembered." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, she heard a sound she had been waiting for all the evening. The distant whistle of a train. The stranger stood up and walked to the edge of the platform. Sure enough, a light appeared in the distance, growing steadily brighter. The train was old-fashioned, with a steam engine that puffed white clouds into the darkening sky. As it pulled into the station with a great hiss of steam and squealing of brakes, Sarah realized she was still wearing the stranger's blanket. She turned to give it back to him, but he was gone. She looked around the platform, confused. There was nowhere he could have gone so quickly. The station house was locked. The only other building was the small shed where he had found the blanket, and it was too far away. The train conductor, a cheerful man with a gray beard, called out, "All aboard for Riverside Junction." Sarah hurried onto the train, still clutching the blanket. She found a window seat and looked back at the platform as the train began to move. The station was empty, but as they pulled away, she could have sworn she saw a figure in a dark coat, standing by the old station house, raising his hand in a gentle farewell. The next morning, Sarah asked around town about the man at the station. The reactions were curious. Some people smiled knowingly, others changed the subject, but Mrs. Henderson, who had lived in Millfield for 70 years, finally told her the story. "That sounds like William Morrison," she said, rocking slowly in her chair on the front porch of the general store. "He was the station master here. Oh, must have been 50 years ago now. Kindest man you ever met, always helping folks, especially teachers and children." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He passed on back in 1985, Mrs. Henderson continued. "Winter evening, just like last night. He was waiting for the last train, helping a stranded teacher get home safely. Had a heart attack right there on the platform, but that's impossible." Sarah said, "I saw him, I talked to him." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Did you know?" "Well, that's not the first time someone said that. William always did have a soft spot for teachers in trouble, especially the good ones." Sarah walked home in a daze, the soft wool blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. That evening she returned to Millfield Station. The platform was cracked and weathered again. The station house was clearly abandoned. The clock hands pointed. 23:15, unmoving, but tucked behind the main building, she found the small shed. Inside, folded neatly on a wooden shelf, were a dozen more blankets, just like the one she carried. A note was pinned to the shelf, written in the same elegant handwriting, "For teachers in need." W.M. Sarah never saw the stranger again, but she kept the blanket, and whenever she heard of a teacher stranded somewhere, or a child who needed a warm coat, or anyone who seemed lost and cold, she remembered William Morrison's kindness. Years later, when Sarah had become the principal of Millfield Elementary, she would tell new teachers about the station, about being patient when things seemed impossible, about the importance of helping others, even strangers, about how kindness could transcend time itself. And sometimes on bitter winter evenings, travelers passing through Millfield would report seeing a tall figure in a dark coat at the old station, always helping, always watching over those who needed it most. The legend of the silent stranger at Millfield Station lived on, one act of kindness at a time. The wool blanket still hangs in Sarah's office, a reminder that even in the loneliest moments, we are never truly alone, and that the best way to honor those who help us is to help others in return. Some say that on very cold nights, if you listen carefully at Millfield Station, you can still hear the whistle of an old train, and the gentle footsteps of someone who never stopped caring.